For the first time this season, we are actually able to talk about Formula One racing. While we did have some changes coming into the Miami Grand Prix with harvesting and deployment, it mattered because the drivers were able to get better qualifying, commitment out of it, not being able to have to lift and coast during a qualifying lap, being more consistent with their deployment. And you accompany that with upgrades brought by Red Bull, McLaren, and Ferrari. And you know what that makes? A weekend less talking about management of energy and more about the execution. Welcome back to Grandstand Therapy. I'm Lori. Let's dive into the Miami Grand Prix. Well, let's first set the scene because coming into the Miami Grand Prix, we knew that we had some rule changes. So, unfortunately, I am going to talk a little bit about energy management because I think it's relevant. So, they had decided that they would adjust for qualifying specifically, they would adjust the harvesting levels. So, previously, we were at 9 megajoules. So, for Miami, we went down to 8 megajoules. And for reference, I found out later on in the weekend, they actually agreed that they would kind of have a range of megajoules. So, from 9 to 6, let's say, and it may be dependent upon tracks that we go to. So, for example, Miami is a very energy rich track. So that's why they only put it at 8. But because I was kind of like, 8, I think it should be down further. But when we get into like Canada, it's going to probably need to be adjusted. So maybe we'll get more into 7. And then as we go along in the season, hopefully get down to 6. But I think it's a good step in the right direction. We definitely saw some great things from qualifying. So I wanted to kind of give the highlights going into the weekend. First off, we had a bunch of upgrades brought. We had our first wave of upgrades. We had first Red Bull brought, I believe, 7 updates. It was to the floor. They also brought their own version of the Macarena wing, like Ferrari has, except for I felt like it was bigger, more robust. And Crofty, even in the broadcast in Sky Sports, tried to call it the Max Arena, but I'm not going that far. Also, they had some really great innovative side pods they added to that car. They also adjusted the front wing and the steering. So lots of changes on that Red Bull. It definitely, according to people on track, was not the same Red Bull that we saw in testing. Also, McLaren, they brought some big package upgrades too. They had, I think, about 6 or 7 as well. And they had already come out and said, Stella had mentioned previously that they would be bringing upgrades to both Miami and Canada. So definitely saw a new McLaren. It looked great. And then we had Ferrari, and Ferrari brought 11 upgrades. And that's a ton. And I don't even remember what they all were. There were so many. So definitely everybody bringing in with full force. So that was the start of the weekend. So I want to start with my biggest takeaways from the weekend. Kimi Antonelli has to be number one. Wow. So 3 consecutive wins, 3 consecutive poles turned into wins. That's huge. That is in a company, just so you know, if you're a new follower to Formula One, that's in a company with the greats like Senna, Schumacher. I mean, they did that in their first seasons with Formula One as well. I mean, that's impressive. But that's not really what impressed me the most about Kimi this weekend. He was definitely on pace, but what really impressed me was his level of consistency, his level of confidence and maturity. I mean, most of this race, he had Lando, the reigning world champion, behind him for 20 laps, just waiting for him to make a mistake so that Lando could capitalize on that. That is impressive. And I know George Russell has come out and saying that this is not his track. He's never competed well at Miami. It's just not his, thing. But you know what, George? I mean, there's a problem here because I don't think even George, I wonder how George is feeling right now. That's my biggest question. Is like, I don't think he even anticipated Kimmy coming off the bat and doing this well. And Kimmy looks almost untouchable at this point. I know it's early in, and so I'm not one that's gonna say like it's over. It's Kimmy's game. I do still think that Russell's in there, and Russell's a fantastic driver. He is worthy of a world championship, and I just don't think I think he's caught off guard by it right now, and he hasn't gotten his brain around this new car as well as Kimmy has. So that's in the conversation. I think if we get to Canada, Canada is Russell's track. He's won it last year. He definitely is competent at that track. But if we get to Canada and Kimmy's still ahead of Russell, I think there's something to be concerned about here. I mean, I don't know. I'm not one that's going to completely throw out my predictions at this point because it's a long season. But that was one of the biggest takeaways from this weekend. And then I think McLaren was another big takeaway from this weekend. They definitely brought a different car. They were completely back on their pace. They looked like in the sprint qualifying and the sprint qualifying and the sprint race. I mean, Lando puts it on pole. Lando wins the race. Oscar P2. That's pretty much back on your game. So that looks really great on them. So I think they're definitely back in the fight. And then we have Red Bull. Red Bull also, they brought so many upgrades to that car. Max was able to get in qualifying and put that within a tenth of Kimmy. I mean, that's impressive. I mean, in fact, when we had the sprint qualifying, I Max was P5 and I was like, okay, I'll take P5. So, I mean, definitely you could tell that Red Bull had definitely made changes in the right direction. Max even came out and said that he felt like he could better get a feel for the car and that he didn't feel like a passenger in the car. So that was a good vibe going on. And I liked that. So, also, something that didn't get talked about until I kind of dug in later is Red Bull watched an episode, a podcast on with Red Bull specifically, and they talked a lot about how they brought it to this car because they take the feedback a lot from the drivers, obviously, which you should. I mean, you absolutely should. We can't use AI software to kind of dictate. You need the guys driving the car to be able to communicate to these teams what they're feeling and where the car needs to go for development. And one of the biggest things they said was the steering. The car was difficult to handle. They were having a lot of understeering for the last three races of this season. And so they really adjusted the steering. And what that did was that made them able to attack more in the corners and brake and feel more confidence with that. And you could clearly see that throughout the weekend with Max because he was dive bombing corners like nobody's business. In fact, Carlos Sainz was not very happy about it. So that was a huge stride, and that might be something that they have an edge on because I don't think other teams quite yet have that under control. So that's something to watch for. So that impressed me. But I think what impressed me the most, or I liked the most, and I consider this my favorite of the weekend, was that we finally have all four big teams in competition. And I think it's kind of closed in and compressed a little bit. We finally have all of them competing. They're all bringing, and they're going to continue to evolve as we now move forward. And I do think like this Miami Grand Prix was the start of 2026. I mean, I really do. And I think it's just going to get better and better. At least that's my hopes. And it gave me a lot more hope. So now let's get into the specifics of qualifying. So, qualifying for me was my biggest complaint, let's call it. I enjoy qualifying so much. Like, Saturday is my thing. Just being able to watch these drivers put the car on the limit, balls to the wall, and really like you just don't know what's going to happen. Like you're like holding your breath at times, not sure who's going to put it out there or how close it's going to be. And that's what we had been missing. But we got that back this weekend. So in qualifying, I'm not really going to talk a whole lot about the sprint qualifying and the sprint race for this episode. Because for me, the sprint qualifying and the sprint race, I feel like is almost like a dress rehearsal for the main qualifying and the race. And while this season, though, is a little bit different because we have all these regulation changes. And this weekend specifically, we had adjustments to those regulation changes. And while they did extend practice to 90 minutes, they still only had that 90 minutes to kind of get ahead of these new changes. And if you're in the case of Red Bull, McLaren, and Ferrari, also you brought a huge upgrade package. So it's not a lot of time. So I think a lot of the teams used the sprint quali and the sprint race to really kind of like a dress rehearsal to kind of get their head around all of it. And some excelled at that, like McLaren. They excelled in the sprint race, where also I feel like Ferrari tried to do the same. I feel like Red Bull kind of like used it as a stepping stone so they could get a handle around it. And then Mercedes wasn't on the podium at all. So in the sprint. So that was kind of interesting. But then let's get into the main race qualifying. The main race qualifying was very interesting because in Q1, Oscar barely made it out of Q1. He was like 16. And that was interesting because in the sprint qualifying and the sprint race, I mean, he was P2. So I don't know if McLaren maybe made some adjustments to the car and he just couldn't get a feel for it in the beginning. But in the end, I mean, he obviously did make it through. And I mean, I'm just going to fast forward to Q3 because that's the relevance of the conversation. But Q3, Kimi Antonelli, man, he comes out and he puts in a stellar 127 lap time, puts it on pole. And then you're just waiting, like the buildup was just finally back to what we're used to. Like, again, holding your breath, waiting to see what's going to happen. And Max Verstappen's still in the garage at like, I want to say it was over 2 minutes, it was like 2:30 maybe. And he hadn't even come out of the garage. And while that's typical of Max waiting to the last minute to do it and gambling on track revolution, I mean, not in this season because you don't know what could happen. But either way, you got out there and you didn't even know. Like, everybody's still kind of going for their times, and you're like, where's everybody going to go? Where's everybody go? And then Max puts it on the front row, tenths off of Kimmy. I'm like, oh my gosh. I mean, it was very exciting. Love to see that back. Love the competitiveness. Charles Leclerc also looked on target. Kind of thought at one point he might get pole. I mean, I felt like I had my qualifying back. I don't know about you guys, but that's how I felt. Then we get into the main attraction, the race. Okay, so we already knew that there was bad weather expected for the afternoon. And in Florida, they have a law that if there is a sporting event, outdoor sporting event, and there's lightning anywhere within 8 miles from that, it's like shelter in place and all things stop. So, I mean, finally, FIA made the decision late Saturday to move the race up by 3 hours to avoid the thunderstorms in the afternoon that were expected. It was a good decision. In the end, it didn't even thunderstorm. However, what if it would have? We would have had no race again, and we've already been starved with no races for the last, 2 races. So I'm glad they moved it up. We did get a race in. We got it completed. I did hope that we would still have rain because I love rain races, and we do not know what this new regulation is going to be with these cars. So I was very excited about that. Not to mention that Max seemed to be really comfortable, and I felt like he could have won this race. But we won't know because that didn't happen. Either way, so we get into the race, and so you've got Kimi Antonelli on pole, Max on the front row with him, and then right behind him, you've got Leclerc and Lando, and then Oscar and Russell. We all know that Leclerc was going to shoot up ahead with his lightning turbo, which is exactly what happened. But what I wasn't aware of is that first opening lap, holy cow, there was so much going on, chaos. So Charles Leclerc obviously shoots off and gets in the front, and then you've got three deep going into turn one into turn two. You had Kimi, Max, and Leclerc like three deep going in, and Kimi had to abort to go on the outline of the track, and then Max is battling with Charles trying to keep it on track, and Max just loses his shit, and he does a complete 360 spin on that track. I really did think he was out of the race. Like, my heart just sunk. And then the dust clears, and he has flipped that car back around and is going back again. I don't know how he managed to first keep it on track, and second, nobody behind him slammed into the back of him. But that didn't happen. It did unfortunately tumble Max down to 10th in the order, and then you had Charles Leclerc leading the race. So that was extremely entertaining. And within that kind of first lap situation, also uh, Hamilton and Calipento kind of had a little bit of a kind of a touch collision. It damaged Hamilton's car pretty bad. It damaged his floor. It didn't really damage, I don't guess, Calipento's car because he did pretty well in the race. So, which I'm going to talk about here soon. But either way, it did damage Hamilton's car enough that it kind of planted him into number P8. That I didn't see this during the race, but of course, I'm sure all of you have kind of seen now that like Hamilton wasn't very happy about that, and he drove by him and used his middle finger to say thank you. As though that was kind of entertaining. So, you know, it's not just Max always being the one that's being aggressive. It can sometimes be others. Either way, that kind of spalled off. Okay, so then we get into lap 6 and we get a safety car. And the reason we get a safety car is because as it Hajar, he clips the wall, and unfortunately he slams into it and he's out, and he is so mad. Oh my gosh, he was beating. I felt so terrible for him. He does not hide his emotions at all, but he shouldn't be beating on his helmet the way he was, because you don't want to mess up your hands. I mean, you got to drive the car. That, and the flip side of that, it almost felt like it was simultaneously. Liam Lawson clips Gasly, and Gasly car rolls over on in a circle, like folds over, tumbles across the track, and then eventually lands up in the barriers. And we didn't even see that until afterwards, and he was already out of his car and okay. Guys, I think we tend to forget that this is racing and it is a dangerous sport. But thank goodness for halos, because that could have been awful for Gasly. So thankfully he was not hurt. And it turned out that it wasn't actually an error that Lawson did. It was actually his gearbox quit working. So he was like a passenger in his car. So that was unfortunate, and that brought out safety car. And so Red Bull decided to pit Max Verstappen because he obviously tore up his tires with that spin, and brought him in for hard tires. And that means that he would have to go however many laps on hard tires. I think they were really gambling on that we were going to have rain come, because they kept coming on radio saying lap 25, we're going to have rain. I think they thought they might. So I think Red Bull thought, well, we'll gamble on going on the hards and making it further. And then maybe we can get out front, and we might have some weather that could come along and tire changes and so forth. Unfortunately, that did not happen, but Max did go down to P16, and he was able to crawl. I'll tell you what, watching him clear the field in aggressive style in all the corners, going at it, was like old school days. Now, if you ask Carlos Sainz, he wasn't very happy about it. He said, Max is in here in the midfield acting like he owns the place and he can do whatever he wants. But you know what? He wasn't doing anything wrong. It was completely legal. And we all know Max. He's a very aggressive driver, and he was taking it by the horns and he was just going at it. So he was able to claw himself back up to the top, say 6 of the pack, which is where he was trying to get back to. And then we got into the regular tire changes, and Mercedes and Ferrari were trying to cover each other off. So Leclerc pits first, and then Russell, and they kind of go back in the pecking order. And then we've got Lando leading the race at this point, and we have Kimi Antonelli up there with him. Now, Mercedes again made a good decision, and they decided to undercut McLaren, and Kimi comes in, and then McLaren unfortunately had a slow pit stop of 3.7, I believe. And Kimi was already on his outlap, so by the time Lando comes out, Kimi's already there. Kimi's out in front, and Lando just never really is able to get ahead of him. Now, Lando was upset following the race because he really did feel like he could have run that race. And rightfully so. I mean, again, like I said in the opening segment, serious. I mean, Kimi Antonelli is a real deal. He held Lando back for 20 laps. I mean, Lando was just waiting on him to make a mistake that he could capitalize on and therefore get ahead and win the race. And that just didn't happen. So props off to Kimi. Stellar job once again. Then we get to the end of the race and we've got more drama happening. So Leclerc was in P3. Oscar was closing in on him, and Oscar was battling Leclerc. And I don't know if Leclerc was just over driving the car or what happened, but he made a mistake and he also did a 360 spin. But unfortunate for him, he did graze the wall and damaged his car. And he decided to keep going. And he starts, going at it with, well, first Max and Russell are right behind him. So Max gets in front of Russell and they kind of go back and forth. Russell ends up kind of clipping Max's tire and causes damage on the front of his wing. And then they start to get in the mix with Leclerc, and that just goes badly. I mean, it's just all over the place. I think at one point we had so many penalties going on in this race. Holy cow. And lack thereof calling what you're going to get. So, first off, we have Max, after he pitted, they came on several laps in saying that he isn't being investigated for going over the white line at the exit lane of the pit lane when he came out. They didn't really have any good footage on it, is what they claim, and they said they'd investigate it after the race. I'm like, why are you going to investigate a penalty like that after the race? Like, that should be a slam dunk. I mean, if you went over the white line in the exit lane, that's clearly a slam dunk 5-second penalty. So I don't really know why they said they had to wait till after the race because that made no sense. And then we get on to the end of the race. Then you've got Russell noted for causing a collision and braking under, I guess, brake checking, let's call it. And then we have Charles Leclerc. Of course, I knew he was going to get a penalty because he was all over the place, but he was out there for driving damaged car, driving erratically, losing the track, leaving the track and gaining an advantage because when he hit the wall, I think it kind of messed up his steering, so he wasn't able to take the corners right. So he was kind of going outside of the track limits and back on the track. So in the end, Charles Leclerc gets hit with a 20-second penalty. Now, do I think that's fair? No. I personally feel like it should have been more like 10. Um, Here's the thing. There's always been a case of someone trying to drag their car across the line at the end to finish the race, right? So there's, people even way back running out of gas, pushing their cars. There's been people with punctures, keeping it going. It's various things. According to the stewards that looked at the evidence, it's because that he was, leaving the track and gaining an advantage, and that therefore wasn't fair to the other drivers on the grid, is why they handed out as big of a penalty that it was. Either here nor there, that put Leclerc in 8th place finishing. So we had Kimi Antonelli, Lando, Oscar, Russell, Max, again, P5. Like, what's with the P5s this weekend? And then we ended up with Hamilton, got moved up to P6, and then Calapinto. Franco Calapinto in the Alpine got 7th, guys. I mean, that's huge. That is his highest point scoring that he's had in Formula One. That's amazing. He had a stellar weekend. He was on it all weekend, just locked in. He had a great event in his Argentinian fans in Argentina being able to showcase his car to his fans. He had great support at the track in Miami this weekend. He had Messi in his garage with him all weekend, and he was just on it. He just really was. And that's great to see. And I hope that that continues for him and Alpine to continue to push along. Because, I mean, we all kind of thought they would have some success this year. And then also, we had the Williams guys finishing double points place for Carlos and Alex. That is amazing. I mean, I don't think people are giving Williams enough credit right now because that car is so heavy and still slow. And even Carlos was complaining nonstop in the sprint race and in qualifying that, guys, this car is not there. We need to do better. And then for them to get double points in that race, again, when the door is open, you have to capitalize on it. And Williams certainly did that. So when you have things that come out of order and things go down, I mean, we had the Racing Bulls didn't do very well this weekend at all, and they typically have been. And then you had, the second Red Bull Isaac go out. So, I mean, and then you had, you have to capitalize on those moments. So they did. And they overtook the Haas's and they ended up with double points. Very, very happy for Williams. And I hope that that is going to help them give momentum to keep pushing, keep pushing, keep pushing. So, in the end, that was kind of my takeaway from the racing weekend. And I like the direction it's headed. It's definitely got some, let's say, I do think, I mean, the overtakes didn't seem as artificial this time. I feel like the drivers were a little bit more in control. I know that they did raise the deployment to 350 cap instead of 250 where it was before. There obviously were some adjustments to the kind of closing speed ratios, and that appeared to be working fine. There was no major incidents. There were mistakes made, yes, that caused some people to spin out, and Isaac's, problem, he hit the wall, and then unfortunately Liam's, caused Gasly to spin, but that wasn't because of the closing speeds that we were seeing in the previous races. So that was definitely a step in the right direction as far as that was concerned. And again, the overtakes didn't seem as artificial as they have been for the previous races. So I think that we're headed in the right direction. I know there's not going to be a quick turnaround for massive changes. Like we need to go more on the ICE and less on the battery, but I think that's more like 27. But it does give me hope that we are going to continue down a path of tweaking as we go and giving the drivers a little bit more ability to use in their performance and kind of controlling their own performance throughout this season. So I'm very excited that we now have lots of competitiveness going on. It seems like the gap's getting a little bit better. McLaren is closing in. Red Bull is finally getting it closed in a little bit more, and it's not just all about Mercedes. Now, I say that because Mercedes did not bring any upgrades this weekend. They are going to be, if we're looking ahead, Mercedes is slotted to bring more upgrades to Canada. So I don't know what that looks like. So we'll find out when we get to Canada in a couple of weeks. Unfortunately, we got 2 more weekends. We got to wait for the next one. I feel like it was like, here's a little tease, and then you got to wait some more. So I'm interested to see because I think it's anyone's game right now, guys. I mean, I don't think it's a locked in for it's going to be Mercedes winning the world championship this year, for example. And I'm not losing my hope that we have lots of people's hats in the ring going forward. Really did give me a lot of hope. So let me know your feedback in the comments that you took away from the Miami Grand Prix. And I look forward to seeing you next time for Canada. Bye.